Hey, this is David Wolinsky of Don't Die, bringing you another audio interview from the archives. Here I'm bringing you the first half of my conversation with Alan Watson, the co-founder of Ozark Softscape. He and I talked on December 10th, 2015. If you'd like to read a full transcript of our conversation, you can check the link below, and also below you'll see a link to my Patreon, where your support helps me continue on with this project. Thanks.
Boy, that's a bunch. Okay, my name is Alan Watson. It's A-L-A-N. Watson. I'm now 68. And I live in M.U.L.E, Arkansas, which is northwest of Little Rock. So we're just very close to the center of the state of Arkansas. And I've lived here since, mostly at the time, since 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And what else did we want to do?
Well, just, a little bit of context about, what was your professional experience in the game industry?
Okay. Well, I actually graduated with a degree in mathematics and taught school for a couple of years and then sold high-end hi-fi. But in the late 70s, Atari and Apple came along and I wanted to buy a personal computer. I actually saw Star Raiders, I believe, on the Atari, and never saw anything that was visually impressive on the Apple, although I felt like the Apple would be maybe better for programming, but the Atari was a lot more exciting as far as sound and video and stuff. And I didn't really have a reason to buy a computer. so it was like the ultimate puzzle. If you're into puzzles, computers, especially back then, were fantastic puzzles because nobody knew very much about any of it.
Yeah.
So what I did was I bought an Atari and I learned how to program. And programming in BASIC turned out to be really, really slow because I wanted to create places to play. I didn't really have games in mind. I just wanted visual spaces and then a thing that you could kind of explore. And so I had to teach myself assembly in order to get that to work. And somewhere around that time, we started, the retailer I worked for began to sell Ataris. And we started an Atari club. And I was familiar already with an Apple club here in Little Rock. And it was pretty well attended and pretty big, probably 100 or 150 people, which is big for Little Rock. Anyway, and through the club, I met Dan Bunton. And Ben was a programmer for the city of Little Rock and had written a number of games, maybe half a dozen, for strategic simulations. And he was trying to convert a game called Cytron Masters to the Atari. And since I knew about Atari and he didn't, I worked with him to do his conversion. And somewhere during that time, Electronic Arts, Trip Hopkins started Electronic Arts, and they went and solicited a half a dozen what they called artists. Those people that could program, I guess, and actually had done games, so they had experience and stuff. And his idea was that he was going to create I've used this analogy before, but I don't know if it's good. Like a movie studio where they would produce and distribute, but they would credit the artists as though they were the actors or rock stars or whatever. And so we began as a group called Ozark Softscape. There were 4 of us that owned the company, and we made M.U.L.E. And at that time, let's see, I made a game somewhere in there. I made a game and sold it for enough that I could get by with my family, 2 kids, and sold it for enough that I could afford to go without being paid for 6 months because none of us took any money for the first 6 months of the M.U.L.E. development. It was pretty tough and a pretty good risk too, I guess. But anyway, we did M.U.L.E. and it did okay. It was kind of exciting because Trip was really into this, and we went to Consumer Electronics Show and were interviewed and met all these people, Playboy people and that kind of thing, just a lot of magazine people, and got interviewed and stuff. So it was a lot of fun, but I don't know what. That's how I got started. We just started.
That's a good starting point. Well,
it was pretty overwhelming. At first, when we first went to CES, that was overwhelming. But I had been a couple of times with the hi-fi store. So.
Well, how was it overwhelming?
Well, just the amount of attention. Tripp was really just, feeding media towards us all the time, and there were only 6 products from the original Electronic Arts launch. Mm-hmm. So we were just one of 6 groups. Actually, I think most of them were individuals, but there was like Ann and what's her name? John Freeman and Ann Westfall were the Free Fall Associates. They did Archon and then a sequel to Archon that were part of that original launch. And I think Pinball Construction Set was one of the original.
So I mean that is something I was wondering about. I did want to ask you about is when the press started to write about Atari and video games, like what do you remember about the way that they approached it?
Well, my favorite magazine back then was Compute, because it would have information that you didn't have any other way to get about Atari and Apple as far as how they worked. That was one of the toughest things in the early days, was there wasn't a good way to find out how this thing, what are the specs, how to make this go, and what's an Antic chip, and how do we make the sound chip stop and start, because Atari wasn't real forthcoming with their info, and so unless you could find other people that were willing to hack and waste time trying to figure out stuff. But Compute was a great reference. They actually did a listing once of maybe it was 4 to 8 pages. It was tiniest little printed sideways on the page, and it was a program listing in assembly for an Atari game, and that was great because it had most of the real gee whiz stuff that Atari could do as far as how to stop and start sound and how to make it do sounds and display list interrupt stuff and that kind of thing. So it was,
but you said that Playboy was writing about you guys as well?
Well, I don't remember when the first time we got reviewed, but we were reviewed, and M.U.L.E. was reviewed in probably at least a dozen magazines. And one of the most impressive was Byte. Byte did a review, and it was the first game review that I can remember ever seeing in Byte. And they liked it. We got a lot of favorable press, but unfortunately it didn't sell as well as we'd hoped, because the estimation was only 1 in 12 copies was purchased, and the other 11 were pirated copies.
Pirated, yeah.
Yeah, it was really, copy protection was just impossible.
Yeah, which I'm not laughing about, just it's absurd, but like how was that number arrived at? Like how did you know that was happening?
It was an estimate from EA. I don't really have any way to base that. I think that they wanted all their games to sell better, but it was, if they did a protection scheme. Now EA did all that. That was part of the production. They did the copy protection and everything. And if they did one thing in 6 to 10 weeks, it's broken again, and so they got to do some other thing. So I think M.U.L.E. went through several iterations of copy protection. So.
Well, so to jump a little bit further back, did you mention, did I hear you right, an Atari club in Little Rock?
Yeah, I started a club through the store, because we actually got to where we had, maybe 2 or 3 dozen people who had bought Atari 800s, and a few people had bought 400s. So I started a club. The first time we met was in the store, actually.
So what year would that have been?
Maybe somewhere around 78.
Yeah. What do you
79? Maybe.
What do you remember about like the club? Like who were they?
They were everybody. Golly, there was there were teachers, and there was one of the guys that was real active in the club was a geologist for the state of Arkansas. John McFarland, I believe was his name. But they were just, there were kids and grown-ups and just people that were curious, I guess, about computers. Like I said, the Apple Club was pretty large by then, and it might have been 79, but we were, there was a lot of interest in home computers. With the Radio Shack's color computer was out by then, and the TI had the 99.4 or whatever it was, the Anyway, TI had some kind of a color computer. So there was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of that time? Because sort of like I think what happened was somehow video games got this perception that they were just for kids, which maybe was largely Nintendo's doing. But how do you see that perception sort of popping up that like it went from your club, which is for everyone, to the notion that video games are just for children?
I don't guess I ever ran into that. I guess either it's been too long, or I never was aware that because we never wrote for kids. We wrote for families. I mean, we tried to write games that a family could play, because Dan was really into multiplayer and family. See, Dan's family and my family both grew up in the days where you played board games on Saturday night. We didn't have a TV or anything. And, till I was in third grade, I don't know about his family, but board games were a really important part of our family interactions. Yeah. And the idea was we could write a game, if we could write, like M.U.L.E was made for 4 people to play, and there was some internal game balancing to help the worst player, or the guy that was furthest behind, and to kind of slow down the best player. And so a family could actually enjoy it, and even though, Dad may have an idea what's going on, and child may not. So, mom,
Well, I mean,
I never was. Yeah, I never thought they were for. I mean, my best mentor in video game play was 14 or 16 or whatever. That was when I was in the retail. He was a whiz on a 2600 and a 800, and those games. That was about the time Activision came out with those, their G-Whiz games that kind of won up the Atari games, and mostly those were teenagers. I don't know is that what you're talking about kids, or are you talking about?
Yeah, well, like
that was true. Those were
teens.
Yeah. Most of the like the scrolling games and the Missile Command and Asteroids and those kind of games were younger people. They weren't adults or whatever. In the sense of, I got a family and I can't afford to buy games, but I can buy them for my kid and play them with it. But for the most part, it was kid oriented, I guess. Teenagers and 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've heard about the notion, or have you run into that notion that sort of tech or the video game industry is sort of a more male-dominated space?
Oh, I think that's been the case, from the beginning. I think that's just a cultural thing. I don't know that it's so much just video games as it is math and science and boys and girls and the way girls are brought up.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were some G-Whiz women, that programmed. It wasn't like they couldn't do it. It was just that it was, I don't know. It was like everything else in math and science is more guys.
Mm. I mean, I had heard, I interviewed Brenda Laurel earlier this year, and she told me when she went to go work at Atari that they didn't even have a women's bathroom, that they were just using it to smoke marijuana.
I'm not surprised. I'm really not. But that was, like I said, I think that was a cultural thing, because, see, my mom didn't work until I was well into high school. I mean, we grew up in a different kind of world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, too, when I think back on sort of those earlier days, a lot of the original game developers were sort of, I sort of got the impression that, proper people weren't making computer games, or proper people weren't making video games. In other words, it wasn't a very buttoned down space. But did you ever talk to I don't know what's the correct thing to say, because you said Dan or Danielle Button. Did you ever talk to Dan about sort of that that male female ratio in the game industry, or sort of some of the cultural tensions around there not being a lot of women?
I don't remember doing that. No. It just probably wasn't important to us. Like I said, we were really pretty much family oriented, and it wasn't. But it was curious though, because when you go, Electronic Arts would have us out once or twice a year, and once was like an awards banquet, and I don't remember that, but both times you'd be schooling, they'd bring in people from IBM or whatever, and I mean, they actually used projectors and stuff back then. It was just really high-tech, impressive stuff for kids from Arkansas. But, and there'd be maybe 10% of the people there might be women. You know, so it wasn't like they weren't there. It just wasn't a thing that most girls were interested in. I think this is a very recent thing here. I mean, all the questions you're asking seem to be questions that arise in the last 2 to 3 years, where it's like, how come there aren't girls? And so we got girls with promise and girls in code and girls do this. I mean, it's like only in the last couple of years has been an emphasis to include women in programming. You know, before it was always, if you want to do it. I mean, look at all the women that are just doing awesome, that are, you know, in their 20s and 30s, like the lady that started Little Bits and the lady that started Adafruit. And I mean, those are super smart, you know, and they've existed all along. It's just that 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when they thought to do that. You know, it's not like there weren't women of just super smart, high caliber, gee whiz. I mean, I in college knowing a lady that was dating a friend of mine that was in chemistry. She was one of the smartest people. She was a chemistry major. I mean, you know, I think it's just a change in our culture in general. I don't think they were excluded intentionally. I think there just weren't enough of them interested to make an impact. You know what I mean? But I do think it's really brought up. I don't think it has to do with, you know, you can't do this or you can't do it. I do think that people that wrote computer games were considered to be a little strange and a little out there because, you know, people would if they asked what you did and you told them, they'd give you that strange look, and it was like, oh, you must know some stuff, but it's also, you must be crazy. You don't need a real job. You know,
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, not all my questions are going to be about that, but, like, you know, I was curious a little bit about, you know, some of the you know, the corporate or company atmosphere, you know, in tandem with working with EA. Like I am curious, like, what did you guys get any pushback for wanting to make, like, you know, video games about diplomacy and economics in the early 80s? Was there any pushback at all?
That was M.U.L.E was our doing. It was Dan had done a game that had to do with, it had a real-time auction in it, Cartels and Cutthroats, I think is what it was. And he wanted to do a version that was real-time where you actually would bid, so we could, you know, use the 4 sticks and make, and that was actually the center point for M.U.L.E was let's make stuff so that we can sell it in auction and, you know, see if who can, you know, produce and be the most efficient and stuff. But no, EA's idea on a sequel was to have guns and stuff and bombs and everything. And so then when we do a sequel to M.U.L.E, we just, you know, went off and did everything. Probably our most violent game was Modem Wars, which was really, really cool, I think. Modem Wars was the first that I know of, game where you can make the 2 computers. You know, you could do a dial-up or just a direct connect, and then that was hidden information. I don't know. Have you ever played Modem Wars?
Yeah.
That is an adrenaline rush. I think it's just, it's pretty, but it wasn't really blood and guts and gore. It was just more, you know, strategy and tactics and stuff.
Why are they telling you to go from, you know, like making games with diplomacy and so forth to making guns? Like, do you know where that was coming from?
Well, I think that was what was popular. I mean, you know, shoot 'em games. And, you know, you know, that's just how all the arcades were. You know, that you're going to lose. It's just how long can you hold out?
That's true.
You know, before you get killed. And I think that was kind of a mindset for, you know, let's sell the most games we can. And I don't think that our interest ever was in selling the most games we could. It was making the best game on this kind of idea. But I will say, we had a storyboard. You know, we get an idea, we do a storyboard and a series of sketches and stuff, and then take it before EA. And they had to approve it before, you know, we'd get advances or equipment that we might need for the development. So, we had to sell the idea. It was, like I said, that's kind of like a movie thing, you know, where you.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, I usually hate these types of questions, but I am curious. I mean, like where did your ideas coming from? Because we're talking about a time where, you know, pretty much nobody knew what video games were, what they were supposed to be. So how did you decide, you know, like, yeah, let's do that. That could work.
I think that probably the Button Brothers were the guys that usually would come up with the theme or the idea. Like I said, M.U.L.E came from Cartels and Cutthroats, and then Seven Cities of Gold was from, Risk, that kind of game, a board game called Risk, I believe. And it was just, also, and then I always wanted to create places for people to play, so that was really appealing to me, to make this giant world and stuff, and for people to go and explore and interact and all that. So that was, and then we did a game called Heart of Africa, and it didn't do all that well. What happened was it was like a resource trading game, and I'm not sure that wasn't somehow something that we couldn't get included in Seven Cities. It just kind of, this is leftover stuff. Our game, that's one thing, you only had 48K, and we never could fit all our ideas into a single game. It wasn't like we ever had to put in fluff or screens, or anything like, use up the space with bitmaps or something like that. It was always like, how do we get 1 more byte of memory? That kind of thing. So, I think, I'm not sure that Heart of Africa wasn't just like I said, came from ideas that we had in Seven Cities. And then, I'm sorry?
No, I just said,
And then, I can't remember, I don't remember the reason for Modem Wars. I just really thought it was amazing that we could, you could unplug from the wall the modem or whatever, and when you plugged it back in, we could recover. It was incredible. I was pretty, Dan wrote that 232 stuff, and it was just amazing.
How long did you have to actually to work on each game?
Usually 9 months or so. I think that's what M.U.L.E.'s time was. But it's real intense at the end. We had rented a house, and we'd have, thank goodness for the Atari Club, we'd have anywhere from 4 to 25 or more people over there at the house playing M.U.L.E. Once or twice a week for several months. From the time it was playable, actually. And I would usually just stand on the other side of the monitor and watch their faces and their hands, because it's real important to me that it's like you want to spend your time and your interest and energy playing the game, not trying to figure out how to play the game.
This is
to
true.
me, there's a really, really big difference in those two, because I struggle with how to play. I've got a 15-year-old granddaughter, and you just hand her the good joystick or whatever if you're going to play a game with her, and she intuitively knows everything that needs to be known. It's just amazing. Or play Minecraft or something, and I'm going, what is the point of this? And she explains it to me, and she's just going on and on. And it's like, wow. And I'm still trying to figure out how to play, right? So it was real important to me that we have games that weren't, where you didn't have that learning curve so much. Now, I think M.U.L.E. has a fair amount of learning curve, but it's not in the mechanics of the game. It's in understanding why are you doing all the stuff that you can do, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. But anyway, so we usually would have, I'll tell you that the biggest challenge for me was we did Robot Rascals on the Commodore, and then they wanted a PC port, and so I got a box from Microsoft. I think you might have heard this in that other discussion. It was I don't know, roughly 10 inches on the side, 4 manuals with C for C, and a PC, and 6 months. So that was single-handedly. Like most of the time, we worked in pairs, but that was one of the reasons why we no longer exist. Is it was real hard it got down to where there were just the two of us, Dan and I, working. For like Command HQ that Micropose published, that was just the two of us, and then Micropose had some artists that did a couple of the animations that appear in the little windows, but the rest of it, for music, we'd farm it out to somebody, and the rest we'd do it all ourselves, and it got to be where we couldn't do a game in 9 months, and if you wait, if it takes too long, then you may miss that idea may no longer suit the market, whatever it is you're trying to do. What seemed like a good idea today, but a year from now, it's like, why did we know? Would we want to market it? So,
I was curious.
You have to,
I was curious about sort of the pressure you guys were under to perform or to succeed. I mean, like, what was the pressure like? Was there pressure?
Well, for that port, there was. There was a big bonus if I made mine 6 months, and so and I kept a log. I actually did work over 60 hours a week, and I would just, as soon as I'd sit down, I'd enter at the time, and then whenever I'd leave the room, I'd take off the time, and it was well over 60 hours a week for the 6 months. So it was tough off and on. I mean, then when you're done, you go and play video games down at the gallery or whatever, for you get a week or two, or all we do is play with ideas and think about what we're going to do next. So I don't know. It had its perks. So.
I mean, how did you measure success in those days on your games? Was it just money or?
No, it was complete. If the EA said we need this by September 1st, then if we made it, then we were.
So
we had to have a game that we liked, though. Yeah, we didn't want to cut corners or compromise. So we sometimes were late, but for the most part, the important part was to have a complete product in the time that was allowed to make it.
Yeah. What would be an example of cutting corners on a game you are making in those days? Like, I don't make games, so I'm not sure of all the nuts and bolts that are involved. But like, what do you even mean?
Well, I'd say we wanted to do animation windows like in Command HQ, and neither one of us had the time because we were working on code or whatever. Well, if Microprose, I think it was Microplay, was a subdivision or whatever. If they hadn't had tech support, then we probably would have left out the animation screens. It wouldn't have affected the play or the play value, but it would have not been quite as what do you call it? Chrome and sizzle? I don't know. It had something to do with being shiny and being hot. Was what Chris called. It needs chrome. I think he said chrome and sizzle. I'm sorry, I can't remember his exact term, but it needs to be, flashy, and it needs to be deep. So we would try to please him and still, keep our integrity or whatever,
Yeah. I mean, how would you know how a game even did? I mean, did they share sales figures with you?
Yes. In fact, we got royalties based on the sales, and so we would start off building the game with advances against royalties. And so we always we together, EA and Ozark, had to feel like we were going to sell at least enough to pay back our advances.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's a way to predict sales. I mean, EA probably has that down to a science now. Gosh, they're huge. But back then it was like, well, it seemed like a good idea to me. So, but usually there must have been half a dozen people at EA. It wasn't Tripp's call because they had producers, that would help us. They would facilitate and make sure that we got what we needed, but they also helped in terms of what the market is and where the market's going and what we might want to do to alter this to be better suited or whatever. But once we got our thing going, we were pretty hard to convince to modify it to suit somebody else's.
So I mean, we're talking, pre-internet as we know it today. Certainly wouldn't be sending messages the way that you and I have. How did you guys get on EA's radar? How did that relationship come about?
I'm sure it had to do with Dan being seen through Strategic Simulations and Computer Gaming World, where he wrote a column. So he was known in the gaming world through his, public. And I'm not sure what Tripp was looking for exactly, but like I said, there were, and I don't know how many approached to do this launch.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious too, because EA then is not EA today. I mean, how many people do you estimate was there at the time? Did you say 6 or in what capacity? Or I guess I'm just wondering how big was EA in those days?
I'm thinking a dozen or 20, maybe 2 dozen. I mean, it was just Tripp, I think, hired people from Apple because he had been at Apple, and he might have hired a few other people. But for the most part, it was people that would help get the product to the market. People like graphic artists and copywriters for manuals and the art for the cover art and stuff like that. And then there were probably 3 or 4. I can remember we worked always with the same man. His name escapes me right now. But anyway, there were probably 3 or 4 tech support people, and those were like people that if you couldn't figure it out, well, you'd call them and they'd say, "Well, I don't know either, but we can figure it out." I mean, because it was really early on, you know. Now, if it was an Apple question, usually we could get an answer, but most of the Apple stuff Dan knew, so it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
That was a tough machine to do graphics for. The Apple was.
So I mean, where was their wisdom at EA coming from? I mean, because even that's true of Apple. You know, Apple then is not at all Apple today. But in general, I mean, like, where did EA seem to be pulling their wisdom from?
I think Tripp was the focus. I'm not sure why he left, but you know, eventually he did, and he formed all those other companies, Chocolate and did Next have something to do with him? I'm not sure.
I think
he
so.
started.
Yeah,
I think he started a half a dozen companies. So I'm not sure what. But in the early days, I think that he and his 2 or 3 producer guys were really the, you know, let's make this kind of product or that kind. Or more often than not, though, it was like, this guy's work is really good. Let's hire him to do something, and then he would present what he wanted to do. So usually, for the most part, the products that they made in the earliest days were products that were dreamed up and designed by the people they produced. It wasn't like Tripp said, I want a game that's like Monopoly, and so we went out and did M.U.L.E. I mean, we already knew the game we were going to do when he, I mean, you know, what I'm saying, it's like, this idea wasn't his. It was, he hired us because of the talent, I guess, not because of we had a product. And that was because of Dan's, I mean, he wouldn't have known me or Jim or Dan's brother or anything. So
yeah, I mean, so what sort of feedback would they give you on your games?
Sometimes it would be bug reports, and sometimes they would be like, well, I think we got, you know, I can't really think of any design feedback, but I'm sure that there was some. I really just cannot remember. So, but I mean, Joe Ibarra was one of our producers, and he would come maybe 3 times a year and spend a few days with us, and we'd all talk and stuff and visit about how it was going and what we needed and stuff. But most of the conversations that I was included in would be had to do with our actual, you know, I need a different board in this computer, or I need a graphics card, or I needed, you know, he'd say, well, you know, we need to support all these different VGA and EGA and monochrome, and it was a mess back then because you had to make a game that would work on everything. I mean, you know, it wasn't enough that you could say, okay, we're going to support the latest Gee Whiz video card. You know, like if you're an Xbox guy today, I guess you can just say, well, it's Xbox One or nothing. You know, if you don't like it, then don't buy the game. Whatever. I mean, you know, I've got a 360, and I guess some of the new games won't run on the 360. You know, on Xbox 360.
That's true. I was curious about that too. Like, are you? I know you mentioned, like, you know, Minecraft before, but are you paying attention to video games nowadays, or?
Not so much. I do. I watch the ads on TV, and then I have 2 sons that are in their 30s, and they have always played video games. I mean, they grew up with. I've got a picture of the 2 of them. With one of them's maybe 4, and the other one's 6, and they're playing Atari games. So. On an Atari 800. I mean, we never had a 2600. But yeah, I usually have a controller, and we play. My granddaughter's now 15, so we don't play as many games as we used to with the Wii. We played a lot of Wii games. And then I have an Xbox, but I don't think we've played that many Xbox games. I bought the Xbox because I wanted to play with the Kinect. Mostly what I do these days is fiddle with Arduino and Raspberry Pi and like a Leap motion controller or a Kinect sensor, or, you know, or whatever, just different things where you can move around and cause lights to go on or motors to start or whatever. Mostly I just play with stuff, you know.